Welcome to Hot Topics. I've had requests to perform a calculation in accordance with 215.2A1, where you would basically do away with the triple D rate and only have two D rates. So before we really get into our illustration and the calculation itself, I wished you would, if you have your code book handy, turn over to page 160, and on the right hand side of the page, at the very top, we pick up 310.16. Now notice that information's new there, and it basically states that we have to be careful when we design the ampacity of the conductor. And it basically has a title head that is the ampacity of insulated conductors in raceways, cables, or directly buried in the earth. And the ampacity should be as specified in Table 310.16, where all of the following conditions do exist. And conductors are rated 0 through 2,000 volts in the table. 2. Conductors are rated 60 degrees C, 75 degrees C, and 90 degrees C. But now notice, keep this in your mind. The 90 degree C column does not exist at all until you derate for 4 more current carrying conductors in a raceway, or routing it through an ambient more than 10 foot or 10% of the conduit or cable run, in accordance, with this item number 2 to 310.16. Number 3 now, you're looking at where it says you can't route it through more than 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Number 4 says you can't have more than 3 current carrying conductors. Now the table ampacity is good as long as you do not violate 1 through 4 in this 310.16 here on page 160 of your code book. Now let's go over and review our table 310.16 on page 161, and let's just get into the left hand side first column. Let's just come down to a 300 kc mil. And notice if we look at that 300, it's good for 320 amps in the 90 degree column to derate back to a usable 75 or 60 degrees C. So in the 75 degree column, it's good for 285, and in the 60 degree column, it's good for 240. And we know 110.14 C1 would say if the load is 100 amps or less, your 60 degree C ampacity without its 60/75. If you're over 100 amps, then you're in the 75 degree column of table 310.16. And then notice if we went to table 8 to chapter 9 on page 705 of your code book, a 300 kc mil has basically 37 strands of wire. And if you should saw one of those strands or a number of them out so that 300 kc mil would fit under a lug, then it's no longer a 300 kc mil conductor in accordance with 110.3 B and C of the NEC. So keep that in mind. So basically, then what we're looking at, we want to look at these rules where we exceed what we're allowed in 310.16 there on page 160. So let's just turn over, if you will, with me, and let's just turn over to page 157. And when we look at page 157, we would look at 310.14, A as in apple 2, title head, selection of ampacity. Now, kind of paraphrasing that, we would take the lowest ampacity if we have to derate and reduce the ampacity of the conductor. And notice the exception gives us 10 feet or 10% of the run. So say we had a service equipment and we routed a conduit with conductors over to, say, a subpanel. And if we routed it more than 10% of the run, and if it was 100 foot, that'd be 10% of 100, that'd be 10 feet, and that'd be in line with the 10 foot, no derating. But if we routed it 15 feet, now we would have to derate. So how would we accomplish that? So we would turn now to page 159. And on page 159, since let's just say we were routing it through 122 degrees Fahrenheit, more than 10% of the run or 10 feet. Then on the right-hand side of the table, 310.15, B as in boy 1, there on page 159 of your code book, we would line up the 122 degrees in a group of temperature ratings, and you notice that'd be 114 through 122, and that would be a 82% derate, reducing that ampacity down to 82% is basically what it's saying. Now, if we had 4 or more current carrying conductors, now we would review page 160, and on the left-hand side of the page, down at the bottom, for 4 through 6 current carrying conductors, again, we would derate 80%, reducing that ampacity of that conductor down. And notice 7 through 9, 70%. But the minute you pull 10 or more current carrying conductors through the raceway, notice 10 through 20, 50%. The ampacity of your conductor in the 90-degree column is reduced down to 50% of its ampacity rating. Now, with those sections in mind, we want to look at the illustration and figure 8-15C from Stallcup's Electrical Design Book, Volume 1. And if you like this video, subscribe and kind of help us out a little bit to keep these videos coming to you. But now let's look at the figure, and let's look at the information given in the illustration. We have loads in amps, non-continuous at 95. Continuous load at 98, and we have 4 current carrying conductors in the raceway routed through an ambient of 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Method 1 now, we're applying 215.2A1A. Method 2, we're applying 215.2A1 little b, and we're referencing our tables 310.15B1 and 310.15C1. And then, of course, when you look at the notes down below, our note 1, we're just basically saying, yeah, we're having a double derate there in accordance with 215.2A1A. And note 2, we're designing by 215.2A1 little b. And then the note 3 says we use the larger ampacity of method 1 or method 2 in accordance with note 1 and note 2. So now looking at the illustration and performing method 1, calculating the load, the connected load at 95 amps is taken at 100%, which is 95 amps. And notice that's loads that operate for less than 3 hours, or they're loads with demand factors added in there soon. And then the connected load of 98 amps is taken at 125% because it's continuous. We come up with 122.5. So when we add those two calculations together, we come up with a total then of connected load, 193. But for the calculated load, we come up with 217.5. Selecting the conductor, after applying to 15.2A1 little a, we go to our table 310.16, and it would take a 4-aught conductor, good for 230 amps in the 75-degree column, because we're over 100 amps, we're 217.5, so we would select a 4-aught in the solution. Method 2. Now we're applying 215.2A1 little b. Do you notice that the continuous and the non-continuous load is taken at 100%? And we come up with 193 amp. But in step 2, we are routing through a ambient temperature of 122 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have 4 more current carrying conductors. So we would take 320 amps for a 300 kc mil conductor, in accordance with table 310.16 and the 90 degree column, and we take 80% of 320, 256. But we still got troubles because we're routing through an ambient of 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So in step 3, we take 82% of step 2, 256 amps, and we come up with 209.9. And that solution says, yes, 200.9, we would use a 300 kc mil due to the 4 current carrying conductors and routing it through an ambient of 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So looking at the illustration then, we would have 300 kc mil routed over to that subpanel. And then notice you have to be able to terminate the 300 kc mil. And if you can't, you're going to have to get a kit that has the lugs that you stab in the lugs you see there to take the 300 kc mil, or you'd reroute it through an ambient that would be less than 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a rerouting of it because you're going to be stuck with the 4 current carrying conductors. Now that's what this figure 8-15C is illustrating. Now you have it, and good luck with your design and installation where you have more than 4 current carrying conductors in a raceway, say 4 more, or you're routing it through ambient temperatures greater than 86 degrees Fahrenheit.